Well, welcome back.
Yep, it's good to be back.
And I'm John Swaino,
I'm Dave Tenney.
and we are Two Beards and a Bible. As indicated last time, we want to pick up with Matthew chapter 10, and the first, actually verses 2 through 4, I want to read there. We're going to be looking into the account of Jesus selecting the 12 apostles. And so let's take a look there in Matthew 10. Starting at verse 2. I'll go ahead and read that. Now, the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus.
Is that it?
That's it.
I'm going to read part of Mark. I'm not going to read the list of all of the apostles' names, but the first couple verses of Mark chapter 3, starting in verse 13, it says, "And he went up on a mountain and he called to him those he himself wanted, and they came to him, and then he appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have power to heal sick, to have power to heal sicknesses and to cast out demons."
All right.
I'm going to stop there.
And I did miss a couple there. I was supposed to read verse 4, which said Simon the Canaanite and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him.
Yeah.
So there we go.
It's interesting that every time, that's the first time we've mentioned Judas Iscariot, but every time he's mentioned, it's mentioned that he betrayed him.
Right.
And you think about the authors of these books, they definitely didn't have a soft spot, I'm sure, for Judas Iscariot.
Right.
So.
Right.
But he gives these lists of these 12, and it seems like when you read this that, so you've got all these people that are following Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And out of all of those people, he picked out the apostles.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it seems like how it worked.
Right. Right, because there were many more disciples.
Yeah.
As we read previously, there were multitudes of people that came out to hear him.
Yeah.
And there were obviously many who went with him. And
what's the difference between an apostle and a disciple?
The apostles were chosen.
That's true.
By Christ.
Duh.
And then they were endued with those the ability to heal and so on.
Why do you think they had these powers? Why did he give them these powers?
As a sign for the validity of the word.
Yeah.
So that people would understand that, hey, these people are worth listening to.
Yeah. Otherwise, people might just think, oh, this is just another heretic, crazy person out here.
Right.
But if they're doing something that shows that, hey, this is the real deal.
Right.
And yeah, as you said, people will definitely perk up and listen to them.
And we need that, because it if you think about if it were to happen to today, if we were to happen to be in that time where Jesus was on earth, or the apostles were out preaching, would we jump on board? The mankind, we tend to question things, and we tend to need proof before we believe things, and God knew that, and he gave that proof.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I think that wraps that part up. Where are we going now?
well, as we think about that, one of the notes that I have in here, that before Jesus appointed the 12, he prayed all night. He went into the mountain and he prayed all night, and he took that very seriously, and spent time in speaking to the Father.
And he chose 12, and yet one of them was a devil. I think Jesus himself says that later on.
Right. And that had to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the 12 were given, as we kind of alluded to a little bit ago. Their job was to go out and preach, and to testify of Christ. And they were given the power to cast out demons and so on. So that was a confirmation of that word.
Yeah.
So as we went down through the list of names, we have, of course, Simon, and he was notable for being the first to confess Christ. We have James, the son of Zebedee, and John, and they're known as
the Sons of Thunder.
Sons of Thunder.
And of course, Simon and Andrew are brothers as well. Simon Peter.
Right. And so as we think on and I encourage you to open up the scriptures and look for yourself. We're not going to go through each and every one of them and discuss each and every one of them in detail. But look down through there and read through the account surrounding their choosing, and it's a good thing to ponder as you study. So as we move on here, we'll move on and talk about the Beatitudes, and we're going to look at Matthew 5, starting at verse 3. Let's see, I can get over to Matthew 5, 3 here.
And the Luke account, I've read both of them today. They're virtually the same. So.
All right. So I'll go ahead and read Matthew 5, 3 through 12. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God. For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
One of the things that I find fascinating about the Beatitudes is all of them start, each one of these little snippets start with talking about something that's inside of you. Mm-hmm. It's always about, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. It's talking about spiritual things. Mm-hmm. When we think about the old law, it was like, lists of regulations. Mm-hmm. But there's a different focus here.
Right.
In the New Testament. And it's really, focused on your inner person.
Right.
What kind of person you are.
And not just the ability to conform to a list of laws, but to be one that works on the inner person. Yeah. That uses the word for what it was intended to do, to change hearts, to change minds, save souls. Yeah.
You think about the 10 Commandments, mm-hmm. and the first 4 10 Commandments have to do with man's relationship with God. And the second, or the last 6 have to do with man's relationship to other men. Mm-hmm. And when we look at the Beatitudes, the first 4 of them are all about man and God, and the second 4, there's 8 of them, are about man and man. Mm-hmm. So I think it's interesting how they're kind of split up in the same sort of way.
Right.
The first one talks about the poor. You just want to go through each one of these?
Yeah.
So Luke's account, it doesn't say poor in spirit. He just says blessed are the poor. Mm-hmm. But I think poor, and since that's the case, it could mean either or. Somebody who's physically poor or somebody who's spiritually poor.
Right.
What would that mean? What would that be like?
I think of someone who's downtrodden, the one who is acquainted with sorrow, that maybe has gone through some, obviously if you're if you're putting on Christ, if you have put on Christ in baptism, if you've been obedient to Him, that's going to lead you to do some things in your life and make decisions that is going to, just as Christ was acquainted with sorrow, you're going to be acquainted with some heartache and some sorrow along the way, because men are going to, mankind is going to disappoint you, just as it disappointed Christ. You're going to find it to be an uphill walk sometimes when you're speaking of spiritual things with others in the world. And so it kind of rings true to the Christian life that we're poor in spirit, or to be acquainted with the grief.
I can't help but think about like Paul when he wrote 2 Timothy. Mm-hmm. 2 Timothy was probably like the last letter that Paul ever wrote. Mm-hmm. He was in prison the second time, and he was in prison like he was chained to a guard. First time Paul was in prison, seemed like it was not a bad deal. Mm-hmm. He kind of like had a little bit of freedom. But the second time Paul was in prison, it seemed like he had a really, really rough time. When you read 2 Timothy, you can kind of get that, Paul's just, mm-hmm. he's poor in spirit. He's struggling there. People have abandoned him. Right. And in that he talks about that hope that he has. And he says the second part is, it says, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how poor our spirit is, we always have that to look to. Right. A thing that can bring us joy.
The other thing that kind of comes to mind is just, I guess, a word that sums it up better is just humility. Yeah. Being one that has things in the proper perspective. Yeah.
He says, blessed are those who mourn, mm-hmm. for they shall be comforted. Now, I think that, if somebody, what this is talking about is somebody who is righteously mourning. Mm-hmm. It's not somebody who's mourning because, I didn't get what I wanted for Christmas. Right. Or whatever. Or I didn't get this gun I wanted. Oh. Right.
Right. Yeah. It's again, we have the mind of Christ. We are to have the mind of Christ, and we will mourn over those same things that Christ mourns over. Yeah. The sheep that has gone astray. Right. Those that the things that we see around us in the world today. We turn on the television and see the direction of society, and there's a lot to be mournful over.
There are, absolutely, and I think I think you're right. That's what he's talking. That would be a righteous mourning. Mm-hmm. Right. The next one he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Oh, the weak. Is that what that means?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no.
Is that a fair enough answer for you?
But sometimes, because those words sound the same,
right?
That's what we think of.
Yeah. Well, I think of, with meekness, we do think of it as weakness. Our society, especially today, if someone is meek and humble and lowly in spirit, they tend to get run over, and it is seen as weakness. And but I think it is better to be thought of as not aggressive. Yeah. There's we see in the scriptures, there were times when Jesus even told, his followers that, the time has not come, and we need to, he even told them to get a sword at one point, because the time wasn't come, and they needed to preserve his life, yes. for a period of time, until the time was at hand, until all things had been fulfilled. And so as we go through life, and as we see, those that are meek, we need to be not aggressive. We don't need to be out there causing trouble, stirring up trouble, and being the aggressors out there in the world.
Somebody, I heard somebody say that one time, that being meek is having the power to do something, but choosing not to do it.
Exactly.
And I think that's the right attitude we ought to have.
Yeah.
Even when we could do something, it necessarily isn't the right thing for us to do.
Right. What was that Teddy Roosevelt said?
Walk softly and carry a big stick.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe not a perfect parallel there, but we get kind of the idea. Not being aggressive.
The next one he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled."
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote this down in my Bible, and I thought this was really good. A really good thought. The parallel it says to be right with God and to do right by God, and that's the idea of being of righteous. That's what it would be. That would be if I was to put a wrapper around righteousness.
Right.
It was is the desire to be right with God and willing to do right by God as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And do you have a desire to know God? Do you have a desire to learn anything about Him? To hunger and thirst for righteousness. We know hunger and we know thirst. I mean, neither of us have gone hungry or thirsty in a long time, but we understand that when that feeling comes upon us, it's about all you can think about.
Yeah.
You get to a point where you haven't eaten in a while, or you haven't drank water in a while. That's just all you can think about. It's an all-consuming thing. And so, do we really hunger and thirst for righteousness? That's a.
If we don't, we ought to.
Yeah.
So that's the first 4 Beatitudes, and those really have to do with our relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these next 4 have to do with our relationship with man. So, verse 7, he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy."
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of being merciful, look over at James chapter 2, and in verse 13. Oh, come on. It's sticking together. James 2. You got that?
Mm-hmm. 2 at verse 13?
Yes.
2 at verse 13 says, "For judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment."
Kind of shows us what our attitude's supposed to be. Blessed are the merciful. We're, as Christians, are supposed to be merciful. Mm-hmm. When we have the opportunity to stick it to somebody,
right?
We shouldn't. We should show people mercy, because rightfully we deserve to have God stick it to us, but He doesn't.
Right.
He's merciful to us. We need to reflect that quality.
Not being one that seeks revenge. It's not our job. I mean, we know from the scriptures that revenge is the Lord's.
Yes.
Now, it's not our job to, if somebody does us wrong, it's not our job to go and seek that revenge on them. We need to be caring. We need to be patient.
Yeah. Which is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think, they say you've got that fight or flight.
Right.
So often it's the fight attitude. And when somebody does something to you, you want to do something back to them. That's the wrong attitude. We can't be like that.
And it's interesting that you turn to James there. And speaking of being merciful and so on, do you know what Philemon did?
Not offhand.
Hebrews James. Philemon, Hebrews James. I snuck that one in.
Okay. Verse 8, he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So, the idea of being pure in heart would be for us to look inward, making sure that our hearts are right with God, and we would want to have a pure heart and the idea that purity is it would be aligned with God's will.
Right. Not pretending.
Not pretending.
When we look around us and see those that are, even in our lives, those that are really truly looking out for your best interest, which each and every one of us should do for each other. We know that there are those that are pretending along the way in the hopes of getting some gain. And I think sometimes in the religious realm of things, people enter into religious endeavors because they think they're going to get some kind of gain from it.
Yeah.
And that's and you will if you have a true heart, you're going to gain everlasting life. But they're thinking more along the lines of personal gain,
influence.
Right.
This next one I think is interesting. I've got some things to bring up. Maybe we can discuss.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." But Jesus said in Matthew 10:34, he says, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." How do we reconcile those two things?
Mm-hmm.
In one place he says, "Oh, you're supposed to be a peacemaker," and here he says he didn't come to bring peace.
Well, for one thing, Christ absolutely did come into the world to do a hard job.
He did.
To stir things up, and in the way of calmness and peace, that wasn't going to come out of it. But we're a little bit different. We don't need to do the work that Christ did.
No,
He's already done it. He's already used the sword. We need to be those that, in situations wherever we can, as we understand from the scriptures, that we are to, as much as possible, as much as is within us, live peaceably among all men.
in Romans 12:18 it says, "If it is possible, as much as depends on you,
Mm-hmm.
live peaceably with all men."
Yep.
And I think those things all come, part of that, I read that Matthew 10:34, but I took it totally out of context.
Uh-huh.
And that's the thing we got to be careful with.
Right.
We can take a scripture and just pull it out of context and say, "Oh, look, these
Right.
contradict each other."
Right. And whenever someone says, "Well, the Bible contradicts itself," it tells you that there's a shallow view of it.
Yeah.
In their part, that they haven't looked closely, because we know God can't contradict himself.
Right.
And that he doesn't.
Typically, when you see something and you find something in the Bible that contradicts itself,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the Bible that's contradicting itself, it's your view of it that is contradicting it.
Right.
And there's been books written about that. I know there was a book written that was like, I forget what it was. It was 200 Bible contradictions in their answers. And every time that one of these things comes up, there's always a logical answer to why it doesn't contradict itself.
Right.
It's just, you want to take the other side of it, okay.
Right.
The last one he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And the thing that I thought of immediately when I read this was the apostles
Mm-hmm.
in Acts chapter 5, when they healed a man, and then they were taken in front of the Sanhedrin, and then they were beaten and thrown in jail.
Right.
Or all the times Paul and Silas or Paul and Barnabas did things, or Stephen, when he was doing the right thing and he was stoned to death.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of examples where people are doing the right thing. They were doing the right thing, and they're persecuted for that. But he says that those people are blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, if you are one that is following the statutes of the Lord, and you're being persecuted because of it. I mean, if you're one that follows the Lord, you're blessed in that you're going to have that blessing of eternal life if you are faithful until death. So that's and then that leads me to at the top of our page there. One of the questions is, what does it mean to be blessed? People throw that word around all over the place, blessed and blessings.
Yeah.
And if you turn on Facebook, you'll see people and they'll put their picture of their family up and it'll say blessed. And that may well be, but what does it mean to be blessed? We look down through here at all the things that the Word of God says that means that you're blessed. That if you're poor in spirit, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those that mourn, the meek. It paints a picture
of being right with God.
Right, which means you're blessed.
Yeah.
If you're right with God. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe we can extend that out and say we ought to be careful when we use that word blessed.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I mean, I think there's, it could be, we could look at it the way as, we could be right with God. And I think that's the context here.
Right.
We could also say that, we're blessed or we're fortunate. I think that's the way a lot of times people use it today. They're fortunate.
Right.
That they have a family or they have food or a house or whatever.
Right. And it rains on the just and the unjust.
It does.
So even though, every person does receive some kind of blessing from the Lord, and just even being able to wake up and breathe.
Even if they don't recognize it.
Right.
Or they go against it, they still receive it.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, John, let's see what the last couple verses are, and I think that's going to finish us up today.
All righty.
It says, "Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." And, you can read about the prophets in the Old Testament, and boy, they really had a tough time, especially during the divided kingdom. And they were considered blessed because they were doing what God told them to do. And he talks about that reward in heaven. And really, I mean, if you think about reasons to follow God's word, heaven ought to be right there at the top of your list.
Right.
I'd say hell would be at the top of your list too. Right.
Well, the top of the places not to go.
Yeah, in the negative, you wouldn't want to go there.
Right.
But you would want to do whatever you could to get that reward in heaven, and we don't even know what that is.
Right. Right. It's beyond description.
Yeah.
And we understand. When we think about, I've thought about it. There are things at this point in my life that I want to see. I want to follow through. That I want to see. I want to see my children grow up. I want to see certain things happen. I would love to see the eventuality of faithful grandchildren.
Yeah.
There's those things that we aspire to on this earth, and sometimes that those sorts of things can get in the way of what is truly important. If we were suddenly struck down in this life, would we initially be happy about that? In that last breath, would we say, oh good, I'm going to be with the Lord? Or would we say, man, I'm going to miss my show tomorrow?
or I almost had enough money to buy that car.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and that's, sadly, sometimes as human beings, we can't get our minds past those temporal things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the Bible, we're not going to get to it today, but it talks about, laying up for yourself treasures in heaven.
Right.
That's where our focus ought to be. It shouldn't be on the earth.
You read the word rejoice there.
Yes.
When we are blessed and we are those that seek after those things that the Lord has given us, we need to rejoice.
Yeah.
We need
to be happy about it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Got a bunch of old sourpusses.
Right. Yeah.
I think that about ties us up here today.
All right. Well, thanks for talking with me. And thanks for joining in and listening to us. We hope that you've gotten something out of it. and pray that you'll join us again, and that you'll look into the scriptures all the more on your own. If we can be of assistance, if we can help you in any way, then by all means reach out to us. This is Dave Tenney, and I'm Jon Swano, and you have a good evening.